Under the moon's unyielding vigil, a lone arrow carved fate's cruel arc through the veil of swirling snow. Mira Solon trudged through the borderlands, her boots sinking into the relentless white shroud that cloaked the jagged peaks of the Iron Fang Range. The wind howled like a forsaken wolf, whipping her dark hair across her face, stinging her cheeks with icy barbs. She was no stranger to this desolation. It mirrored the void that had carved itself into her chest 2 winters past, when her own pack had cast her out. An omega without a mate's mark, deemed too fragile for the wars that raged between realms, she had been left to wander these frozen fringes as a scout, useful but unseen. Rejection had not come in screams or claws, but in the quiet turning of backs, the erasure of her name from the hearth songs. Now, she served the greater packs from the shadows, her loyalty a tether to survival, her heart a scar tissue that ached with every frost-bitten breath. The air carried the metallic tang of impending blood, mingling with the crisp bite of pine resin from the skeletal trees that clawed at the sky. Mira's hand instinctively brushed the pendant at her throat, a delicate crescent moon forged from silver, mined in the lunar caves, its surface etched with runes of forgotten prophecy. It had been her mother's, the last remnant of a lineage whispered to carry the Deuce's hidden gifts. Pathfinders, the elders had called them once, women who could sense the threads of destiny in the wind. But Mira's pack had dismissed such tales as Omega folly, banishing her when her visions proved too inconvenient, too disruptive to their alliances. The pendant warmed against her skin now, a faint pulse like a distant heartbeat, urging her onward through the storm. She crested a ridge, her breath clouding in ragged bursts, and scanned the valley below. The border was a scarred no-man's land, where the packs of the north clashed with southern invaders, hungry for the sacred hot springs that bubbled beneath the ice, sources of healing said to mend even the deepest wounds of the soul. Mira's role was simple: report movements, evade patrols, survive. But tonight the wind carried more than snow. It bore the low rumble of hooves and the sharp scent of oiled leather and steel. Her senses sharpened, the Omega instinct coiling tight in her gut. Shadows flickered in the tree line opposite, not the familiar gray of her allies, but a deeper black, laced with the acrid smoke of foreign torches. A patrol. Raiders from the Eclipse clan, their banners hidden but their intent clear, strike at the heart of King Tharos's domain. Mira had heard the tales of the Alpha King, a warrior etched in legend, his rule forged in the fires of betrayal after his mate's death at the hands of a rival Alpha. Guilt shadowed him like a curse, they said, driving him to endless campaigns to atone for a kingdom's sins. She had glimpsed him once, from afar, during a council at the Frost Citadel, his eyes like storm clouds, his frame unyielding steel wrapped in fur and chainmail. He commanded respect, not affection. His heart, if it beat for anyone, was buried with the fallen. But Mira was no queen's shadow. She melted into the snowdrift, her cloak blending with the white expanse, watching as the raiders fanned out. Their leader, a hulking beta with a scarred muzzle, signaled with a guttural bark. Bows creaked, arrows knocked. Then, from the eastern pass, came the thunder of Tharos's vanguard, elite guards in silver-embossed armor, their breaths sinking in disciplined rhythm. At their fore rode the king himself, astride a massive black warhorse, its mane frosted like the mane of a spectral beast. His presence cut through the gale, a force that bent the wind itself. Mira's pendant thrummed hotter, a warning she could not ignore. She had been tasked to warn them, but the storm had swallowed her signals, leaving her isolated in this deadly ballet. The ambush erupted in a symphony of violence. Arrows whistled like vengeful spirits, embedding in shields and flesh with wet thuds. Shouts pierced the night, weavos of defiance from Tharos's men, snarls from the raiders. Blood sprayed across the snow, blooming crimson petals against the virgin white. Mira's heart pounded, her body urging flight, but duty rooted her. She edged closer, weaving through the chaos, her eyes locked on the king as he cleaved through the fray with a massive broadsword, its blade catching the moonlight in lethal glints. He was a tempest incarnate, every swing a decree of retribution, yet his face bore the weight of unspoken sorrow, lines etched deep from years of command and loss. One raider broke through, bow drawn taut, his arrow aimed true at Theros' exposed back as the king dispatched another foe. Time fractured. Mira saw it, the fatal path, the glint of poisoned tip. Her visions, long suppressed, surged unbidden, a flash of moonlight pulsing like a dying star, a soul halved and yearning. Without thought, she lunged from her cover, shoving forward through the snow. The arrow loosed, a silver streak slicing the air meant for the king's heart. It found hers instead. Pain bloomed, sharp and absolute, as the shaft pierced her chest just below the collarbone, grazing the vital beat within. Mira staggered, the world tilting in a haze of red and white. She collapsed to her knees, the snow cradling her like a reluctant lover, cold seeping into her bones. The pendant slipped from her grasp, dangling by its chain, glowing faintly as if weeping silver tears. Hoofbeats thundered closer. Theros wheeled his horse, his eyes, those storm-gray depths, locking onto her. The battle raged on around them, but in that suspended breath, the moon above swelled brighter, its light bathing the scene in ethereal silver, pulsing in time with her faltering pulse. He dismounted in a blur, dropping to his knees beside her, his armored hands, gentle, impossibly so, cradling her as she slumped against him. Blood welled from the wound, staining his fur cloak, the warmth of it stark against the encroaching chill. "Mira," he whispered, his voice a shattered thunder, raw with a recognition that clawed from the depths of his soul. In her fading gaze, she saw it, not the king, but the man, haunted by ghosts he could never outrun. She had been no mere scout to him, though she had never known it, overlooked in the ranks, yet woven into his fate like moonlight through storm clouds. The missing half, stirring now in the agony of this moment as the wind wailed their unspoken bond into the night. The snow beneath Mira's body turned to slush under the heat of her spilling blood, a crimson river carving paths through the frost like veins of forgotten prophecy. Her vision blurred at the edges, the world narrowing to the king's face hovering above her, Theros, whose name she had whispered in the dark hours of her exile, a specter of unyielding command. His hands, calloused from years of wielding both sword and scepter, pressed against the wound with a tenderness that belied his armored might. The arrow's shaft protruded like a cruel thorn, its fletching matted with her essence, and each shallow breath she drew sent fire lancing through her ribs. Yet in the haze of agony, she felt the pendant's chain tangle between them, its silver crescent catching the moonlight and casting fractured glows across his jawline, as if the Deusa herself etched their fates in luminous script. "Why?" Theros' voice cracked, not the roar of a battlefield king, but a murmur laced with the gravel of unspoken remorse. His gray eyes, stormy as the peaks that hemmed this cursed valley, searched hers with an intensity that pierced deeper than the arrow. He had known her name, Mira Solon, the shadow scout from the outer packs, the Omega whose reports had guided his campaigns through whispers carried on raven wings. But this recognition burned hotter, a primal pull that twisted in his gut like the guilt he carried for Alara, his lost mate, slain in a betrayal that had shattered his throne's foundations. He had seen Mira in visions, fleeting dreams dismissed as war's fever. A woman with eyes like polished obsidian, her presence a balm to the void Alara's absence had wrought. Now, cradling her, he denied it even as his wolf howled within, sensing the mate bond's fragile spark igniting amid the chaos. Fear coiled in Mira's chest, sharper than the pain, a Omega's terror of being seen, truly seen, after years of invisibility. Her pack had rejected her not for weakness, but for the visions that unraveled their fragile peace, glimpses of bloodied crowns and lunar eclipses that foretold ruin. banished to the fringes. She had armored her heart in solitude, serving Tharos's realm from afar, her loyalty a silent vow to prove her worth. Curiosity flickered now, warring with the instinct to recoil. His touch was fire against ice, stirring scents of pine smoke and aged leather that flooded her senses, mingling with the coppery reek of her wound. "You shouldn't," she gasped, her voice a threadbare whisper lost to the wind's mournful keen. Her fingers twitched toward the pendant, brushing his gauntlet, and a jolt passed between them. Instinctive, electric, like the first crack of thunder before the storm. Around them, the battle's fury ebbed and flowed, Weavos echoing off the cliffs as Tharos's guards dispatched the last raiders. Bodies lay strewn like broken idols, their blood steaming in the cold, painting the snow in abstract sigils of war. One of his betas, a grizzled warrior named Kale, approached warily, sword dripping scarlet. "My king, the Eclipse dogs are routed. We must move. Their reinforcements will scent the blood." Tharos's gaze never left Mira, his body a shield against the encroaching night. He lifted her carefully, her weight feather-light in his arms, the arrow's shaft grinding against his armor with a sickening scrape. She bit back a cry, tasting salt on her lips, tears or blood she could not tell. The pendant swung free now, its runes pulsing faintly, as if drawing strength from the moon's swollen gaze overhead. He carried her through the fray's aftermath, his strides measured against the uneven terrain, each step jolting fresh waves of torment through her. The wind clawed at them, carrying distant howls that mourned the fallen, while flakes of snow danced like spectral witnesses. Mira's mind reeled, rationalizing the pull she felt, not destiny, but delirium from the poison blooming in her veins. The arrow's tip, she knew from its acrid tang, bore nightshade extract, slow death for even the hardiest wolf. Yet Tharos's proximity warded it somehow. His scent enveloped her, a grounding force that eased the edges of her pain, stirring memories of hearthfires long denied. She wanted to push away, to deny this alpha who embodied the hierarchies that had crushed her. But curiosity held her captive. What wound did he hide beneath that regal facade? The tales spoke of his melancholy, a king haunted by a mate's ghost, his every victory tainted by the blood on his hands. They reached a sheltered overhang in the ridge, a natural alcove carved by ancient glaciers, its walls veined with ice that gleamed like frozen tears. Tharos lowered her onto a bed of pine boughs his men hastily gathered, their faces etched with concern. He knelt beside her again, drawing a dagger to cut away the arrow's shaft with precise, surgeon's care, each motion a battle against his own trembling resolve. Blood welled anew, hot and insistent, soaking the furs beneath her. "Hold on, Mira," he murmured, his breath warm against her chilled skin. "You saved me. I will not let the shadows claim you." His fingers lingered on the pendant as he worked, tracing its curve unconsciously, and in that touch, the denial cracked. The bond whispered truths he had buried. She was no mere soldier, but the key to unraveling his curse, the Omega whose exile mirrored his own inner banishment. As the moon climbed higher, bathing the alcove in silver light that danced across the bloodied snow, Mira's eyes met his once more. Fear and curiosity intertwined, a fragile bridge over the abyss of their shared solitude. The pendant warmed between them, a silent vow from the Deusa, hinting at revelations yet to unfold. But for now, survival demanded they cling to this instinctive tether, even as the night deepened its grip. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The alcove's icy embrace held them like a reluctant guardian, its vaulted ceiling of frost-dripping stone whispering secrets to the wind that probed its edges. Mira's world had narrowed to pulses of pain, and the king's unyielding gaze, each breath a labored theft from the nightshade's creeping venom. Tharos's hands, now stripped of gauntlets, worked with a precision born of too many battlefields, packing the wound with salves scavenged from his saddlebag, herbs crushed under his thumb, their bitter scent rising like a ward against death. The pendant lay between them on the pine boughs, its silver crescent humming faintly, as if the deusa breathed life into its runes, drawing the moonlight down in threads of pale silk that wove through the shadows. She watched him through half-lidded eyes, the omega in her recoiling from this intimacy, even as curiosity anchored her. Who was this Alpha King really, if not the myth of iron will and shadowed remorse? His face, illuminated by the flickering torch one of his guards had thrust into a crevice, bore lines carved by more than war, guilt's subtle etchings around his mouth, the faint tremor in his jaw as he bound the wound with strips of linen torn from his own cloak. The air thickened with the mingled scents of blood and pine smoke, his warmth a stark counterpoint to the chill that clawed at her limbs. "Rest easy," he said, his voice low, threaded with a vulnerability that startled her. "The poison moves slow in your veins. My healers will come with the dawn." Dawn felt like a distant myth, the moon still reigning supreme, its light pooling in the hollows of his armor like liquid mercury. Mira shifted weakly, wincing as the binding pulled taut, and her fingers brushed the pendant again. It warmed under her touch, sending a shiver through her, not of cold, but of something deeper, an instinctive tug that mirrored the wolf's call she had long suppressed. Fear bloomed anew. Rejection's scar tissue cracked under this gaze, threatening to spill the isolation she had woven as armor. "You don't know me," she murmured, her words slurring against the fog in her mind. "Why? This care? I'm just the scout who blundered into your war." Tharos paused, his gray eyes lifting to meet hers, storms brewing in their depths. He sat back on his heels, the torchlight gilding the edges of his broad shoulders, casting long shadows that danced like specters of his past. Outside, the wind carried the faint, retreating howls of the routed raiders, but Kale's voice cut through from the entrance. "Sire, scouts report Eclipse reinforcements, 3 packs strong, closing from the southern pass. We hold the ridge, but night favors ambush." The king's jaw tightened, duty's chain pulling taut, yet he did not rise. Instead, he reached for the pendant, holding it up between them, its glow intensifying as if recognizing his touch. "I know more than you think, Mira Solon. Your visions. They've guided us through blizzards that should have swallowed armies whole, dismissed by your pack as Omega whims, but I've seen their truth in the outcomes." Her breath hitched, the revelation a cold wind through her defenses. The pendant had always been her secret sentinel, pulsing with glimpses of paths untrod, bloodied borders, crowns toppled by betrayal, a king kneeling in silver light. She had sent those warnings anonymously, ravens bearing sketches etched in haste, never dreaming they reached the throne itself. Now, in this frozen sanctuary, the denial frayed. His scent enveloped her fully, aged leather, hearth ash, and the wild tang of untamed forest, stirring the bond's whisper, resisted yet insistent. It was no fairy tale pull, but a raw, rationalized ache, survival's ploy or fate's cruel jest. "They banished me for it," she confessed, voice fracturing like thin ice. "Called it madness. And you're the king who lets Omegas fade into the snow." A shadow crossed his features, guilt's familiar specter. Tharos's hand closed around the pendant, not claiming it, but offering it back, their fingers intertwining briefly in the exchange, a spark that jolted through her like lightning over peaks. "I've let too many fade," he admitted, the words heavy as forged steel. "Ilara, my mate, taken by a traitor's blade in the heart of our own hall. I avenged her, but the blood never washes clean. It stains the throne, the pax, my soul. Duty demands I lead, but guilt chains me to the past. His voice dropped, raw with the weight of unspoken nights, where dreams of silver-eyed women haunted his solitude. Mira saw it then, in the flicker of torchlight on his scarred knuckles, the broken king beneath the crown, his ethical core frayed by the moral quagmire of rule. He was no tyrant, but a man who chose mercy in war's maw, only to bear its cost alone. Empathy stirred unbidden, a warmth uncoiling in her chest despite the poison's chill. She had wandered in exile's grip, her heart a barren waste. Yet here was a mirror, power's isolation, rejection's echo. The wind outside surged, rattling loose stones, and Kale's urgent bark followed. "They're here! Archers on the ridge!" Shattering the fragile hush. Theros rose in a fluid motion, drawing his sword with a whisper of steel on scabbard, but his eyes lingered on her, a vow etched in storm gray. "Stay hidden. This refuge holds. For now." He positioned his guards at the alcove's mouth, their forms silhouetted against the moonlit fray beyond, arrows whistling like vengeful spirits as the eclipse forces probed the defenses. Mira pressed against the stone wall, the pendant clutched to her heart, its pulse sinking with the distant weavos and the thud of clashing blades. Pain throbbed in rhythm with the battle's cadence. But so did something new, a bond forging in the crucible of shared peril. She rationalized it still, gratitude for his care, curiosity about the man who knelt for a forgotten Omega. Yet as she watched him fight from the shadows, his sword a arc of moonlight, felling foes with precise, sorrowful strikes, the resistance weakened. The Deuce's symbols wove through the night, blood on snow, fire from torches leaping like defiant stars, the moon bearing witness to their tentative alliance. Hours bled into the dark, the skirmish ebbing as dawn's first gray tendrils clawed the horizon. Theros returned, bloodied but unbowed, collapsing beside her with a sigh that carried the weight of worlds. His hand found hers, not in claim, but in quiet solidarity, the pendant bridging the space between. In that touch, empathy deepened to something visceral, a tether against the cold, born of wounds that mirrored each other. The refuge had held, but the night whispered of trials yet to come, dilemmas of heart and hierarchy looming like storm clouds over the peaks. What is strength, if not choosing to guard the broken when the world demands you stand alone? The first light of dawn crept like a thief through the alcove's jagged mouth, painting the bloodied pine boughs in hues of pale rose and reluctant gold. Mira lay still, her body a battlefield of lingering fire and unnatural chill, the poison's tendrils weaving deeper into her veins like roots seeking the heart of an ancient tree. Theros remained at her side, his presence a steadfast shadow. The weight of the night's skirmish etched in the fresh cuts across his forearms and the weary slope of his shoulders. The pendant rested against her chest now, its silver curve rising and falling with her shallow breaths, a silent sentinel amid the hush that followed the clash of steel. Outside, the wind had softened to a mournful sigh, carrying the faint, acrid smoke of dying campfires and the distant weavos of patrols reclaiming the ridge. But within this frozen womb of stone, time suspended, binding them in the fragile truce of survival. Mira's mind drifted through veils of fever, fragments of visions surfacing like ghosts from the snow. She saw not the alcove's icy walls, but a throne room drowned in shadow, where Theros stood alone. His crown a noose of thorns, blood pooling at his feet from wounds not his own. The pendant burned hot against her skin, its runes awakening in a cascade of light that spilled from her fingertips, unbidden and fierce. Her eyes fluttered open, locking onto his, those storm-gray depths now rimmed with exhaustion, yet alight with a quiet ferocity that mirrored her own hidden storm. The visions, they come stronger now, she whispered, her voice a rasp against the dryness in her throat. Pain lanced through her with each word, but so did clarity, the Deuce's gift uncoiling like moonlight piercing storm clouds. She had always resisted it, this Pathfinder's curse, burying it beneath layers of exile's pragmatism. But here, in the king's shadow, it demanded reckoning. Tharos leaned closer, his hand hovering near hers, not touching, as if afraid to shatter the fragile peace. The air between them hummed with unspoken currents, the scent of his blood mingling with hers, a primal alchemy that stirred the wolf within her to wary attention. "Tell me," he urged, his tone laced with the gravel of command softened by genuine plea. He had glimpsed her power in the raven's messages, cryptic sketches that had steered his forces from ambushes and blizzards alike. Yet he had rationalized them as Scout's intuition, not the divine thread of fate. Now, as dawn's light caught the pendant's glow, doubt eroded like frost under sun. His own past haunted him. Ilara's death, a betrayal by his brother Alpha in the Eclipse clan's pay, had left him adrift. His rule, a hollow echo of vengeance. Prophecies spoke of a redeemer, an Omega unbound by pack loyalties, whose sight would mend the fractured crown. He had dismissed them as bard's folly, until this woman, rejected, resilient, had thrown herself into death's path for him. The vision surged then, vivid and unrelenting, pulling Mira under like a riptide. She gasped, her body arching against the boughs, fingers clutching the pendant as light bloomed from it in ethereal pulses. Images flooded her, the Iron Fang range aflame, southern invaders breaching the hot spring's sacred veil, their banners black as eclipsed moons. At the center, Tharos on his knees once more, not in grief, but in surrender, his sword cast aside. A choice between war's fury and a mercy that could unite the fractured packs. But woven through it all was her own thread, the pendant as key, unlocking a ritual under the full moon where blood and forgiveness would bind destinies. The poison amplified it, twisting pain into prophecy, her heart's faltering beat syncing with the vision's rhythm. Tears traced frozen paths down her cheeks. Not from fear, but from the weight of revelation, the Deuce's whisper that she was no outcast, but the bridge between his guilt and redemption. Tharos's breath caught, his hand finally closing over hers, the contact igniting a spark that raced through them both. The pendant's light flared brighter, casting their joined forms in silver relief against the stone, and in that glow, he saw it. The truth etched in her eyes, obsidian pools reflecting his own fractured soul. "You are the Pathfinder," he murmured, awe threading his voice like veins of gold in ore. The words hung heavy, a confession that shattered his denial. She was the missing half, not in fairy tale bliss, but in the raw forge of shared wounds, the Omega whose exile echoed his inner banishment. Her gift, the key to unraveling the curse that bound him. Guilt had armored him against such bonds, rationalizing every connection as duty's illusion, but this was visceral, undeniable. Her visions mapped not just borders, but the moral labyrinth of his reign. To embrace her meant confronting the past's shadows, choosing compassion over the throne's cold steel. Mira pulled back slightly, the intimacy a double-edged blade. Fear of vulnerability clashing with the curiosity that had drawn her to him in the first place. The light from the pendant dimmed, leaving them in dawn's muted glow, the alcove's chill seeping deeper as her strength waned. "It's not a gift," she said, her words laced with the tragedy of her banishment. "It's the reason they left me to the snow, visions of ruin, of kings falling not to swords, but to their own unhealed scars." Her free hand pressed against the bandaged wound, feeling the arrow's ghost, the blood's warmth a reminder of the cost. Yet in his gaze she saw acceptance, not pity. A melancholic king who understood rejection's bite, his ethical core recognizing her as equal in fate's weave. The wind outside stirred anew, carrying the low rumble of approaching hooves, his healers perhaps, or the eclipse's vengeful return. But for this stolen breath, the revelation bound them, her dom as the lantern in his endless night, his realization that destiny demanded not conquest, but surrender to the light she bore. As the first rays pierced the alcove fully, illuminating the pendant's runes in crisp detail, Theros nodded, a silent vow forming in the lines of his face. The moon had waned, but its influence lingered, a spiritual tether urging them toward the trials ahead. Mira's visions faded, leaving exhaustion in their wake, yet a spark of Renascimento flickered. Her hidden power no longer a curse, but a shared destiny. What is forgiveness, if not seeing the divine in the discarded and claiming it as one's own salvation? Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. The sun's ascent clawed higher over the Iron Fang peaks, its pale light fracturing through the alcove's icy lattice like shards of a shattered vow. Mira's body trembled on the threshold of renewal, the poison's grip loosening under the salves and the pendant's insistent glow. But the vision's aftershocks lingered, a psychic tremor that blurred the line between prophecy and peril. Theros's hand remained clasped in hers, a bridge of warmth amid the encroaching dawn chill. Yet she felt the weight of his realizations settle like fresh snow. She was no longer shadow, but spotlight, the pathfinder whose sight could unmake or remake his fractured realm. Fear coiled in her gut, not of the wound's ache, but of the exposure it demanded, her exile's solitude cracking under the moral gravity of what came next. The wind outside stirred restlessly, carrying the low thunder of approaching riders, their scents threading through the air like omens, kin and foe entwined. Kyle burst into the alcove first, his grizzled frame silhouetted against the blinding white, flanked by two healers bearing satchels of lunar herbs and vials of steaming elixir. Behind them loomed the silhouettes of Theros's inner guard, but Mira's sharpened senses caught the undercurrent, a pack divided, whispers of dissent rippling like cracks in glacial ice. Theros rose swiftly, releasing her hand with a reluctance that echoed in the hollow of her palm, his storm-gray eyes flicking to the entrance. "Report!" he commanded, voice steady as forged steel, though the lines of his face betrayed the night's toll, guilt's shadow deepening with each breath. Kyle knelt briefly, averting his gaze from Mira's bandaged form, respect mingling with unease. "The eclipse reinforcements broke against our line, sire, but not without cost. Word from the citadel. Your brother, Lord Varen, rallies the border packs. He claims the ambush was your folly, pushing too far south, inviting war. The elders summon you to judgment at the Frost Hall. They question the Omega's role." His eyes darted to Mira, accusation veiled in duty's cloak. Theros's jaw clenched, the name Varen a blade twisting in old wounds. His brother, once second in command, had betrayed him after Alara's murder, whispering alliances to the Eclipse Alpha, Riven, whose poisoned arrows now haunted Mira's veins. Varen's ambition had fractured the pack, exiling loyalists like Mira under guise of purification, deeming her visions a threat to unity. Tharos had spared him once, choosing mercy over execution in the throne room's bloodied aftermath, binding him with oaths of fealty. But guilt gnawed at the king. Had his compassion sown the seeds of this resurgence? He turned to Mira, the pendant's chain glinting between them like a chain of fate. "You must come with me," he said, not as order, but entreaty, his voice laced with the melancholy of a man confronting his past's specters. "The hall will demand truths only you can unveil." Mira pushed herself upright, pain lancing through her ribs like winter's bite. But the Pathfinder's gift steadied her, a surge of clarity amid the fog. The healers worked swiftly, their hands cool and efficient, pressing poultices that smelled of moonbloom and ironroot, drawing the poison's residue in dark rivulets. She met Tharos's gaze, curiosity warring with the instinct to flee. This confrontation pulled her into his world's vortex, where love's whisper clashed with freedom's call. Rationalized as duty, the bond tugged insistent, his ethical resolve mirroring her own suppressed fire. Yet to embrace it meant facing the pack that had discarded her, the traitor who echoed her rejection. "They'll see me as curse," she murmured, fingers tracing the pendant's runes, their warmth a defiant pulse against her skin. "The one who sees too much. What choice do I have but to run?" The journey to the frost hall unfolded under a sky heavy with unshed snow, the king's retinue cutting through the drifts on sturdy mounts, Mira borne on a litter draped in furs that did little to ward the wind's accusatory howl. Tharos rode at her side, his black warhorse snorting plumes of frost, his presence a shield against the pack's sidelong stares, betas and alphas alike murmuring of the Omega who had felled the king to his knees. The citadel loomed as they crested the final pass, towers of glacial blue piercing the clouds, banners of silver wolves limp in the still air, the hot spring steam rising like spectral breaths from the valley below. Blood from the night's battle still flecked the gates, frozen in crimson sigils that the Deuce's light turned to ruby warnings. Within the hall, the air thickened with the scent of oiled wood and smoldering braziers, flames leaping like caged spirits under the vaulted dome, etched with lunar phases. The elders sat in a semicircle of ancient thrones, their fur mantles heavy with runes, faces weathered as the peaks themselves. At their center stood Varen, tall and lean, his eyes a colder gray than his brother's, scarred lip curling in feigned loyalty. Riven, the Eclipse Alpha, was absent, but his shadow lingered in the tension, a rival whose war cries echoed from the borders, promising invasion if Tharos's rule faltered. "Brother," Varen intoned as Tharos entered, Mira supported on his arm, the pendant hidden beneath her cloak but thrumming like a second heartbeat. "You bring the outcast to our council, the one whose visions sow discord? The packs tire of your guilt-driven wars. Ilara's ghost blinds you." The words struck like arrows, reopening Tharos's core wound, guilt flooding his veins hotter than any poison. He steadied Mira against a pillar, his hand lingering on her shoulder. A touch resisted in public, rationalized as protection, yet accepted in the bond's quiet insistence. The elders leaned forward, their voices a chorus of judgment. Mira's banishment for disrupting alliances, her visions foretelling Varen's betrayal too late. Tharos's mercy toward his brother, a moral lapse that invited Eclipse incursions. "Choose," the High Elder growled, eyes like chipped flint. "War to crush the traitor and his southern allies, or freedom for the packs, abdicate, let Varen lead unburdened by your shadows. The Omega's presence taints this. Send her back to exile." Mira's heart thundered, the hall's chill seeping into her bones as visions flickered at the edges, blood washing the throne in waves, a crown forged from forgiveness or shattered by vengeance. Varen's gaze locked on her, recognition dawning. The scout whose warnings had thwarted his plots, now the key to Tharos's unraveling. Fear surged, but so did resolve. Her rejection had forged her, not broken her entirely. Tharos stepped forward, sword at his hip, a silent threat, yet his voice carried the weight of ethical torment. "Varen's betrayal slew Ilara, fractured our blood. War calls for his head, Riven's packs in ruin. But mercy built this realm before guilt tore it." His eyes sought Mira's, a plea in their storm depths, love or liberty? The choice a razor between her freedom from pack chains and the redemption they might claim together. She clutched the pendant beneath her cloak, its heat a spiritual anchor, the Deuce's symbols weaving through the flames. Fires dance, mirroring blood's flow, the moon's reflection in the hot springs below pulsing like a judgment's verdict. To forgive Varen meant risking all, her visions confirming his remorse as feint or truth, or to demand war, binding her to Tharos's side in chains of duty and desire. The air hummed with uivos from the outer walls, distant howls of packs gathering, the wind rattling the banners like fates undecided. Mira's voice rose, steady despite the pain's echo. Strength is not in blades, but in seeing the wound and choosing to heal it, even when it bleeds your own. Theros nodded, the moral crossroads etched in his face, but the elder's murmurs swelled, Varen's hand inching toward his dagger. The confrontation teetered, a precipice where past and future collided, demanding a choice that could crown or condemn them all. In the silence that followed, the pendant slipped free, its silver light spilling across the hall like moonlight on bloodied snow, illuminating the dilemma's core. Forgiveness as freedom's price, or war as love's unyielding forge? What is true power, if not the courage to forgive the unforgivable, when the heart whispers of destinies intertwined? The frost hall's braziers flared as if stirred by the pendant's sudden luminescence, their flames leaping in crimson tongues that licked the vaulted shadows, casting elongated specters across the elders' stern faces. Mira felt the silver crescent pulse against her palm like a living heart, its runes etching patterns of light onto the flagstones, veins of prophecy that snaked toward Varen's boots, illuminating the dagger half drawn at his hip. The air thickened with the scent of smoldering resin and the metallic undercurrent of tension, every breath a labored draw against the chill that seeped from the glacial walls. Her wound throbbed in rhythm with the light's cadence, a reminder that blood had already been the bridge between them, now demanding more, a reckoning with the past's jagged edges. Theros stood unmoving, his broad frame a bastion between her and the semicircle of judgment, yet his storm-gray eyes betrayed the fracture within, guilt's tide rising to drown the king he had forged from Alara's ashes. Varen's lip curled, his lean form coiling like a wolf scenting weakness, the scar across his cheek a pale echo of the deeper betrayal that had severed brother from brother. "See? The outcast's trinket weaves illusions," he sneered, his voice a silken blade slicing through the murmurs. "Father's blood runs true in me, Theros, untainted by ghosts and Omega whims. The packs crave stability, not your endless atonement. Abdicate, and let me end the eclipse threat with iron, not mercy's folly." The elders nodded, their fur mantles rustling like distant winds, eyes flicking to Mira as if she were the curse incarnate, the pathfinder whose visions had unraveled their fragile accords, foretelling Varen's treachery in dreams they had branded heresy. Mira's fingers tightened around the pendant, its warmth seeping into her chilled skin, stirring the Omega's buried fire. Rejection's echo resounded in the hall's hush, her pack's cold dismissal, backs turned in the snow-swept exile, now mirrored in these alphas' gazes, useful seer, but never kin. Fear clawed at her ribs, sharper than the arrow's ghost, urging flight into the endless white beyond the gates. Yet curiosity, that insistent tether, held her rooted. Tharos's proximity was a gravitational pull, his scent of pine ash and forged steel mingling with the blood on her bandages, rationalizing the bond as survival's illusion even as it deepened. She had glimpsed his soul in the alcove's silver glow, the ethical king who chose restraint over slaughter, his melancholy a veil over the duty that chained him. To stand with him meant embracing the pack's scorn, trading her hard-won liberty for a love forged in redemption's crucible. Or to walk away, leaving him to war's maw, her freedom a hollow victory stained by his fall. The high elder rose, his voice gravel over ice. "The Deusa's light reveals truths, King Tharos. Varen speaks of unity through strength. Crush Riven's hordes at the hot springs. Claim their southern veins before they poison our waters. Your mercy spared the traitor once, it invites ruin now. The Omega's presence sows doubt. Banish her again. Or face the pack's fracture." Weavos swelled from the outer corridors, a chorus of betas and warriors gathered beyond the doors, their howls threading through the stone like veins of unrest. Blood from the border skirmish still flecked the thresholds, frozen crimson that the pendant's light turned to glowing embers, symbols of choices unmade. Tharos's hand brushed hers in the shadows of the pillar, a fleeting anchor that sent sparks racing up her arm, resisted, yet craved, the bond whispering of destinies halved by solitude. Varen stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Mira's with predatory gleam, recognition twisting into malice. She saw my hand in Alara's end, whispers to ravens that nearly cost me my head. Yet you knelt for her. Brother, as you never did for our queen. Is this the guilt that blinds you? Love for a discarded Omega, or fear of the crown's weight alone? The accusation hung, a moral gauntlet flung into the firelight, forcing Tharos to confront the heart of his torment. Ilara's blood on his hands, not from the blade, but from failing to see the betrayal brewing in Kin's eyes. His face paled, the lines of command cracking under guilt's onslaught, yet he did not yield. Mercy is no weakness, he growled, voice resonant as thunder over peaks. It built our alliances before ambition tore them. Varen, you slew her for power's whisper, riven's gold over blood's bond. War would drown us all in rivers of it, but forgiveness, it could mend what you've shattered. Mira's vision surged unbidden, the pendant flaring hotter, pulling her under in a tide of silver-threaded images, the hot springs steaming under siege, Riven's banners eclipsing the moon, Varen's dagger plunging true unless stayed by a ritual of blood and vow. Tharos at the center, choosing, war's fury crowning him in isolation, or compassion's fragile union, her hand in his under lunar witness. Pain lanced through her, the poison's remnant twisting with the prophecy's weight, tears freezing on her lashes as the hall's chill deepened. Freedom beckoned, slip into the snow-veiled exits, vanish as she had before, her gift a solitary flame unshared. But love's shadow loomed, redemption not as reward, but proof, demanding she heal the wound that mirrored her own. The wind outside howled, rattling the banners like fates in discord, distant drums echoing from the borders where Riven's forces massed. She stepped from the pillar's shadow, the pendant dangling free, its light bathing Varen's face in unforgiving silver. I saw your remorse in the visions, not faint, but fracture, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs, the words a philosophical gauntlet thrown back. Not for Ilara, but for the brother you betrayed. Power or compassion, the choice isn't yours alone. The elders gasped, the air humming with spiritual tension, the Deuce's symbols alive, fire's leap mirroring blood's potential flow, the moon's pale reflection in the hall's high windows, pulsing like a heartbeat denied. Varen recoiled, dagger fully drawn now. But Tharos moved like a storm unleashed, his sword whispering free to parry the strike aimed at her throat. Blades clashed in a visceral ring, sparks flying to mingle with the brazier's glow, the confrontation erupting into chaos as guards surged forward, Weavos shattering the night. Mira pressed against the wall, heart pounding in sync with the fray. The pendant clutched like a talisman against the moral abyss. Tharos fought, not with rage, but sorrowful precision, each block a plea for the brother lost, each advance a step toward the choice that could free them both. Varen's eyes met hers amid the whirl, not hatred, but a mirror of her exile's despair, ambition's chain as binding as rejections. The elders called for halt, but the wind carried war's herald, horns from the south, Riven's approach thundering like an avalanche. Tharos disarmed Varen with a final, resounding clash, the traitor kneeling in bloodied defeat. Yet the king's hand stayed the killing blow. "Choose with me," he rasped to Mira over the din, gray eyes imploring across the melee. Love's path through war's shadow, or liberty's solitary drift into the storm. In that suspended clash, the pendant's light swelled, illuminating the precipice, forgiveness as the forge of Renascimento, or vengeance as freedom's pyre. The hall trembled with the weight of it, Snow beginning to sift through cracks in the dome like Deuce's tears, whispering of sacrifices yet to come. What is destiny, if not the wound we choose to share, turning exiles cold into the warmth of reclaimed souls? Snow sifted through the fractured dome of the frost hall like the Deuce's silent lament, blanketing the flagstones in a veil of white that mingled with the blood from Varen's disarmed hand, turning the crimson spill into a mosaic of reluctant mercy. Mira's breath came in shallow gasps, the pendant's chain burning against her skin as its light wove through the chaos. Threads of silver piercing the brazier's leaping flames, illuminating the raw edges of choices unmade. The air hummed with the clash's aftermath, weavos from the corridors swelling into a tempest, guards' boots thudding like heartbeats against stone, the wind outside howling its verdict as Riven's horns blared closer. A thunderous promise of invasion from the southern vale. Her wound pulsed in echo, the arrow's scar a visceral reminder that survival had always demanded more than breath. It required the forging of souls in fire and frost. Tharos stood over his kneeling brother, sword tip hovering at Varen's throat, the blade's edge catching the pendant's glow in a lethal shimmer. His chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the storm raging within, guilt's relentless tide, crashing against the ethical bulwark he had built from Ilara's grave. Varen's eyes, gray as tarnished steel, lifted to meet his, not defiance, but a fractured mirror of the king's own melancholy, ambition's chain yielding to the weight of kin's blood. "End it, then," Varen rasped, voice thick with the gravel of feigned remorse, his scarred lip twisting in the firelight. "Or spare me again, and watch the packs burn for your softness. The eclipse comes. Riven will claim the springs, drown our lineage in their poisoned depths." The elders shifted uneasily, their thrones creaking like ancient bones, the High One's flint gaze boring into Mira, the outcast whose light exposed their hypocrisies, her visions a spiritual indictment of their complicity in the betrayal. Mira pressed her back against the pillar, the stone's chill seeping through her cloak like exile's old embrace. Yet the pendant anchored her, its warmth uncoiling the Pathfinder's gift in a surge that blurred pain into prophecy. Visions cascaded, the hot springs erupting in steam and slaughter, Riven's hordes eclipsing the moon with black banners, Varen's dagger turning not on Theros, but on himself, in a ritual of atonement under lunar witness. But at the core burned the choice: sacrifice her essence through the pendant to bind the brother's wounds, curing the poison of betrayal that festered in the realm's veins, or union without it, a fragile alliance forged in war's unforgiving forge. Freedom whispered still, a siren's call to slip into the storm-swept night, leaving their fates to unravel without her thread. Rationalized as self-preservation, the pull resisted. Yet acceptance bloomed, tragic and tender, in the recognition that her rejection had been but preparation for this, healing not as reward, but as the Deusa's proof of worth. She stepped forward, the snow underfoot crunching like fragile vows, her hand extending the pendant toward the brothers. Its light swelled, bathing the hall in ethereal silver that danced across armored forms and fur-draped shoulders, silencing the weavos to a reverent hush. "Blood calls to blood," she said, her voice a poetic cadence rising above the wind's keen, laced with the intimacy of shared scars. "Not in vengeance, but in rebirth. Varen, your ambition was exile's echo, a wound seeking power to mask the void. Tharos, your guilt chains you more than any crown. The Deusa demands sacrifice, my light for your union, or we all fade into the snow." Tears traced frozen paths down her cheeks, the air thick with the scent of blood and resin smoke, the brazier's flames bowing as if in deference to the lunar symbol. Theros's sword wavered, his gray eyes locking onto hers across the divide, storm depths reflecting her obsidian resolve, the bond no longer denied, but embraced in its raw redemptive fire. He sheathed the blade with a whisper of steel on leather. Dropping to one knee beside Varen, his hand clasping his brother's arm in a grip that trembled with the weight of forgiveness. "Rise," he commanded, voice resonant as thunder over peaks, yet softened by melancholy's veil. "Not as traitor, but kin redeemed. We face Riven together, not with war's blind fury, but compassion's edge." Varen hesitated, the pendant's glow piercing his defenses, revealing the remorse Mira's visions had glimpsed. Not faint, but a fracture healed in this moment's grace. He nodded, rising unsteadily, the brothers' forms silhouetted against the flames like ancient idols reborn. The elders murmured assent, the spiritual tide shifting as horns outside faltered. Riven's forces scenting the unity's shift, packs rallying under the silver light spilling from the dome. Mira's strength ebbed then, the pendant drawing her essence in luminous pulses, channeling it into the air like moonlight on bloodied snow. Pain lanced through her, visceral and profound, her body crumpling as Tharos caught her, cradling her against his chest with a tenderness born of love's final acceptance. The wound in her side knit under the ritual's glow, poison fleeing like shadows before dawn, but the sacrifice etched a new scar, not of rejection, but of chosen union. Varen's hand joined theirs briefly, a triad sealed in the Deuce's fire, blood, forgiveness, and the moon's eternal vigil. As the hall emptied into the fray beyond, warriors streaming toward the borders with howls of renewed purpose, Tharos carried Mira to the hot spring's edge, steam rising like spectral breaths to envelop them. The water bubbled warm against the eternal frost, its healing vapors mingling with the wind's sigh, the pendant dimming to a soft ember against her skin. In his arms, under the waxing moon's gaze, she felt the Renascimento complete. Exile's cold transmuted to the warmth of souls intertwined, love as the ultimate redemption, not bliss, but the profound choice to heal what the world had broken. His lips brushed her forehead, a vow whispered into the night. "You are my half, Mira Solon, no longer shadow, but the light that crowns us both." The realm stirred awake under their union, the iron fang peaks echoing with weavos of rebirth, fire and blood yielding to the moon's compassionate rain. In that embrace, strength revealed itself not in conquest, but in the mercy that mends the deepest wounds, turning tragedy into destiny's enduring flame. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.